Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today, we're taking the elevator down to the severed floor of Lumon Industries to talk about the extraordinary sound work on Severance. This is the first part of our coverage about the hit Apple TV Plus series. Coming soon, we'll be sitting down with cinematographer and director Jessica Lee Gagne. But today, we are joined by the sound team behind the extraordinary sound work of Severance. Joining the conversation is Supervising Sound Editor, Sound Designer, and Re-recording Mixer Jacob Ribicoff, Re-recording Mixer Bob Chefalas, and David Schwartz, the production sound mixer for two of the episodes we'll be focusing on today, episodes 7 and 10 from Season 2. Yes, episode 10 was the season finale, so consider this your official spoiler alert. We will be discussing details from that episode and more, including some major plot twists and other surprises. So make sure you're caught up on the show before joining us at the water cooler down in MDR. I started our conversation by asking the team how the sound of the show has evolved from Season 1 and the new sound challenges in Season 2.
One of the hallmarks of Season 2 is that we're now spending a lot more time in the outie world. In fact, we have whole episodes like Cobell's returning to Newfoundland or whatever that strange, upper pole, cold places, or the Ortbo episode 204. And there's an intensity there's an intensity to the environments and to the outie world that I think the outie world in Season 1 was pretty much like an ordinary, suburban place. The outie world in Season 2 is a little crazier and more heightened. You have Cobell's demon VW Rabbit that she drives. You have Milchick's motorcycle. You start thinking about, you have all of these elements in the outside world that are now heightened. So I think that contrast, you go from the placid, really quiet world of Lumon to this very, heightened, energetic outside world. And I think that really serves to kind of ramp up the tension, for the viewer.
Especially the way the episodes were designed, where episode 1 was all innie, episode 2 was all outie, and then the Ortbo, we went to the outside world where the innies were in the outside world for the first time. So to them, everything there is new. The snow, the waterfall, the ice. So we were able to, the wind, we were able to really exaggerate that and, let them hear what it would be like to listen to the ambience for their first time.
That's interesting. Yeah, I had a note I wanted to ask you guys about the distinction acoustically between the innie world and the outie world because they're so distinctive. But tell me a little bit about just Jacob, maybe you can just walk us through a little bit about the sort of the sound palette of Lumon and kind of what's happening in that space acoustically, because it's so striking visually, but I think it's equally as striking from a sound design perspective, kind of what's happening in Lumon. And I mean, it inherently has a huge contrast with the outie world.
One of the primary objectives, according to Ben, was that Lumon should be a quiet place and should be a place with the air sucked out of it. I had this idea for Season 1, which we really kind of went to town on more in Season 2, especially in episode 207 with the testing floor, which is that, that Lumon is this kind of sinister host which feeds off of its employees. And so with that in mind, I thought, wouldn't that be really interesting to create room tones out of breathing, out of breath, and actually just fold those in and mix those in with normal room tones. So we did a little of that in Season 1, and then we went much further, especially on the testing floor in Season 2. So there's kind of some animal breath and some human breath in there, like very long, like, just a breath that just goes on for an entire scene. So, that kind of helps in the corridors. You're hearing that in the corridors in all over Lumon. And then, of course, there's the technology, and the That's another signature in terms of, that blend of some very retro 8-bit kind of 80s video, 90s video, 8-bit technology, the keyboards that they use, all of those things is another element of it.
I would love for you to just kind of dig into that a little bit more, Jacob. And I'm sure this must have come up in your conversations with Ben in season 1, but kind of like what was the what was the impetus from a storytelling perspective behind kind of having that retro? Like I see the computers at Lumon and I think about the the TRS-80 that I had when I was when I was in elementary school. Just kind of the feeling of that, and obviously it has big ramifications in terms of the sound design. But sort of what was the intention in terms of what that was going to have, what that was going to say to the viewer, and how did it inform what you do from a sound design perspective?
I don't think that intention was ever articulated or spelled out by Ben. I think a large part of what we do is that the episodes, the material is put in front of us, and we see it, and we see these really wild kind of contrasts in technology in eras without there really being much of an explanation about why. So it's mysterious. It's as mysterious to us as it is to you as the viewer, to everyone as viewers. So it's a matter of looking at that and saying, okay, well, what does this sound like? How is this going to sound? And kind of letting us intuitively, and intellectually find a signature, a solution sonically for that world. And I think what we see visually really dictates that, and I can say, for example, that keyboard that's used on set that was, so well recorded by Dave and his team. We took, actually in season 1, we took that keyboard. We asked, in Foley, we asked for that keyboard. My Foley editor, Eric Strausser, he actually asked for photographs. He went to the prop department and he got photographs of all kinds of props of the surfaces from them. And in the case of that keypad, we actually had that sent to the Foley house, and we were working with George Lara and Marco Costanzo, who are, great seasoned veterans, great of Foley artist and mix engineer as there are in New York or anywhere in the world. And so we, so they actually had that keyboard. So we had good production sound. It's a beefy kind of, 80s, 90s keyboard. It's not what we have now. So, that's kind of how we pursued that.
Dave, I'd love for you to step in and one of the things that I notice about the show right away, and Jacob brought it up, is how quiet it is, especially the Lumon interiors. And that's often a huge, challenge for Bob and Jacob in post, because, they don't have anything to hide behind in terms of, big sound effects moments. So that puts even more pressure on you to capture really clean dialogue and production tracks. So talk to us about sort of your approach to kind of handling those locations and those sets at Lumon, and how you capture production dialogue.
Get everything I can as clean as I can. That's the name of the game. Signal to noise ratio, right? I'm going to say MDR, the macro data refinement floor, was very interesting for me. I only came in after the strikes were over, so I did the last 4 episodes. And it was such a surprise. That honeycomb ceiling really threw me for a loop, because a lot of the shots are on a downward angle looking up, so they can really see the ceiling. So there were times where we had to boom from below. And while that changes the presence of the human voice, I found that there were times where an actor would be standing under one specific honeycomb, and the reflections were so bad that it sounded like the boom mic was pointed in the wrong way. It was really confusing to us to figure out in the beginning. And then it was just like, okay, but they're standing directly underneath the honeycomb. We can't boom from below. It's actually better to boom from above, but further away if we have to. And it was also just wire everyone, because there's so many scenes where they're just so quiet, they're so whispery. And if we can't get the boom in right there, we really wanted to capture every nuance, every breath, every sigh, every little whisper word, so that Bob and Jacob can work their magic and make it sound as good as it reads on the script.
Tell us a little bit about the balance between the location work and the stage work on the show. I mean, I think the lobby of the Lumon building is a practical location, but obviously the testing floor and the MDR floor are built sets. And then you also had some interesting. Was the birthing cabin, was that a location, or was that a built set?
For me, for episode 210, when Mark was talking to himself on the camera, that was a built set. I believe going back, it was probably at one point a location. And then for the stuff that we did for when Mark meets Miss Cobell, and then he's talking to himself on the camera, that was on stage.
Tell me about did you shoot any scenes in that big sort of the Lumon, the lobby and the atrium? That sounds like that seems like an insane location.
It's an insane location, and you can't really shut it down. You can shut down the areas that you're shooting in, but it's still a very public place. So we were constantly working around. I think when we were shooting there one time, there was a college admissions seminar happening. So we're up on the second floor, and down below was just different colleges in Jersey setting up shop and, recruiting students. And we have to work around that type of noise, and they really can't shut down. So my job there was, again, signal to noise ratio, just try and get the mics as close as possible. So Bob and Jacob can really get rid of all that extraneous background noise, and the lobby can sound as empty as it actually was.
That's amazing. How much ADR is in the show?
Surprisingly, very little. The dialogue is so well recorded, we almost never had to do ADR for technical reasons. I can't think of any instances. It might be for an ad, but very little ADR, very little group ADR, except for a couple of episodes. But David, I have to tell you, your dialogue, your recordings are so clean. You make my job easy. I tell you that.
Thank you. That's my job. I appreciate it.
I'd love to focus on episode 207 for a moment, which is such a departure from the rest of the show, not only visually but I think sonically as well. We spent a lot of time. This is the episode where we established the backstory with Gemma, the relationship between Mark and Gemma, and so I would love to, Jacob and Bob, for you to talk a little bit about your approach to those flashback sequences and maybe how they sound different from the rest of the show.
Well, I remember the first time that I screened that episode, and we found out that they shot those flashbacks in 35 millimeter. So I remember, I would screen it, and then I spoke to Jacob right after, and I said, we got to do something with that 35 millimeters. So we came up with the idea that whenever we went to the flashback, we would fold everything into mono. So all the sound went to mono, and we were making it sound like, an old 35 millimeter, soundtrack with the Academy filter. And, we didn't add noise, but we just wanted it to be right down the center. And then when the flashback was done, we would open up and it would spread out into the Dolby Atmos. So that was a sound idea that we had after screening it for the first time. And, depending on how you're watching it, if you're listening to it in an Atmos soundbar or a 5.1, you should get that effect of it folding down and opening up.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know that, visually, emulating like a 70s film style was really important. So I love the fact that you echoed that from a sound perspective as well.
Yeah, just a little bit of an EQ, just, throw it off a little bit, put it back in time.
But even in Lumon, we've got a lot of, Jacob, as you mentioned, there's a lot of new stuff. We've never seen the testing floor. And you've got some really interesting opportunities because you've got all those crazy different scenarios that Gemma goes into. There's the, right. The Christmas scene, the plane, the plane, right. going down scene, all these different locations. That must have been a lot of fun for you from a sound design perspective to get to build all that material.
Oh, absolutely. It was hugely fun. And because of the fact, again, I think, I was thinking about that and those spaces that when Gemma goes into one of those other worlds, Cold Harbor or whatever the names are, there are some interesting tones in some of them, but they're largely very quiet. So say when she's writing the thank you note, you're really hearing the Foley that we've done. And the Foley it just lifts off. It's in relief, so you're really, really feeling it, hearing it. And it's the quietness, it's that quiet context that enables the Foley to really kind of jump out in that way. But the other thing I'll say about, 207 is, I don't even have enough words to describe how satisfying and moving that episode is, and for sound design. And one of the things that strikes me about what that episode is it's a dream. The whole episode is like a series of dreams. In fact, I think the whole show is very dreamlike, and I think it taps into something that we all experience, dreams having to do with work and our lives and our relationships. So the accelerated, there are these amazing scenes in 207, like the journey down the cables, through the cables, through the ceiling, out of the shower, and down through the cables and out into some of the monitoring rooms, the watchers. They were opportunities to take the sounds from previous that we had established, the signature sounds, like the refining process, and suddenly create this crazy sped up version of that.
For signs of sadness, and verbally encourage her to forego further suicide.
And it was a chance to take many of the sounds that we had been using and just bend them and twist them and, make them surreal. So I think, there's a lot of surreal stuff in 207 and a lot of very lyrical things for the flashbacks, and the relationship between Mark and Gemma that just gave us, Jessica did an amazing job, and we had a special spotting session for that episode. That was just, can't say enough about it.
I can't let you go without discussing the innie to outie transitions, on the elevator. And I'm kind of curious, Jacob, you guys have been with the show since the beginning. I would love to find out sort of like, what was the, what was that development process like for season 1? How did you figure out sort of what that, because it's a very distinctive sound that happens when those transitions happen. How did you develop that? And I'm curious, did it change at all for season 2? Because you've also got some different kinds of transitions now. It's not just the elevator. Sometimes you've got thresholds that people are moving through.
Since people have been asking me this question and I've given some general answers, I went and looked up the recipe to see what the ingredients were, in fact. So I'm going to read off what the ingredients are for the transition sound. In no particular order, and everyone will know what I'm talking about. So once they're in transition and their eyes are fluttering, which is really the exact moment that the transition is happening, everyone was calling that the fritz. I mean, that came from Ben and Jeff Richmond, the supervising editor, and it's echoed in the music, and the signature tag at the end of the opening credits is the musical version of the fritz. but the sound design version is a combination of a high pitched square wave at 5,289 hertz and static, which has been chopped up and put into exact sync. So that's what you're hearing there. The elevator dings, and it's also a ding that you're hearing during the transition, which is pitched differently, is actually derived from a 727 airplane alert sound, like, something that's a little retro also, telling you to put your seatbelt on, the seatbelt on, etc. There are hums, there are hisses, there's a low end pulse, there's an airy whoosh for the Zolly shots. So, that's what you're referring to, the transitions in and out of, especially in 207, we go from being in the elevator to going in and out of these doorways. So it was important that we not hear the elevator and only hear the whooshes, the airy whoosh that's used for that. It helps with that. There's an ascending and descending kind of thing, which is actually derived from an elevator sound, but it's a synth. It's actually a synth elevator kind of recreation. And let me see if I forgot anything here. I think that pretty much covered it.
That's great. Well, you heard it here, kids.
Yeah.
How to create your own severance.
How many hertz again? 5,800 and what was it? How many hertz?
Right.
That's amazing.
Oh, how many hertz? Yeah, that was 5,289.
Not 90.
Put it all together, stir it up, bake at 400 degrees, and you have your.
And do the transitions that we hear in season 2 for Gemma on the testing floor, and even Mark in that birthing cabin when they're actually they're passing through a threshold, are those basically the same, or is there a different kind of flavor for those?
For in 207, the basis is the same, but each time there's timing differences. And there are definitely context differences. So no elevator, as I said. And, for example, there's a sliding door in 207 that's very much beefed up, and that sliding door it's like a wood sliding door. That kind of takes the place of the elevator at times.
You mentioned the music, and I do want to touch on Theodore Shapiro's music for the show, which has kind of become an iconic element in its own right. It's so unsettling and so moving. So, Bob and Jacob, I would love for you to talk a little bit about working with that score, with the music elements that you get in from Theodore. Because there's also, you touched on this a little bit with that Fritz, because I feel like there are sometimes some elements of sound design that appear in the music and vice versa. I feel like there's a very porous relationship between the music and the sound design in the show.
Teddy does an amazing job at delivering a score that just captures the scene, the emotion, works around the dialogue. He gives us plenty of stems to work with, so we're able to reach. And if we hear like a new sound element that we haven't heard before, we may say, "Oh, bring that up. Let's introduce that one." Or if there's a theme that's been introduced, that's something that's repeated from season 1, and we want to, enforce that. And, but his score is absolutely amazing, and it's great to work with.
Yeah, and he, from a sound design perspective, he's got some great, besides that Fritz sound, he's got some clocks ticking that have are heightened musically, rhythmically. But in at the beginning of episode 209, with the swimming pool scene with Helly, there's this clock ticking that's been built into the score, but that's also has a counterpoint sunk up, which is an actual clock tick. And then when we cut to the close-ups of the clock, we're hearing that, and we see the hands moving. We're hearing that. The score is so incredibly propulsive, and it does something for the rhythm. I think all these episodes are so incredibly rhythmic. There's an incredible propulsion that happens. Episode 9, especially as you get to the latter episodes, and the same thing in season 1. So, and it's and the music is pretty wall to wall. So I'm looking for little holes in the music where I can, poke some sounds that make sense. I found that, car engines, oftentimes the usual car engines that I would use on most projects, oftentimes were not necessarily compatible with the score. So I would dig and stretch for, different sounds that would be compatible. I did also pitch some of those elevator and transition dings to match, to sit well with the score.
Tell me a little bit about sort of just the nuts and bolts kind of process question about the kind of the post workflow on a multi-episodic like this. Kind of how did the schedule arrange itself? I presume that you didn't work your way linearly through episode 201 through 210, but I'm kind of curious, at what point did you start to get Theodore's music in? Did you Jacob, did you have some of those elements that you could sound design against, or sort of how did that whole process flow?
I did, actually, which was great. I really had a version of the whole score right from the beginning of working on every episode. And even if it did change, it was pretty close to what we ended up with. I also know that Jeff, the editor, and Theodore or Teddy, worked very closely in the editing process on the stems, so that by the time Jeff was coming in and sitting with us during the mix, he had almost like a photographic, memory of every stem. And Bob knows. I mean, just pointing and picking out, elements from, stem elements from the score to raise or to lower stem by stem.
I want to talk about episode 10 for a minute. And of course, one of the fun moments of episode 10 is the choreography and merriment, the big band moment. David, I'd love to start with you. Tell us about sort of the production of that sequence, and I presume was that done to pre-records, or what was the capture on that scene?
It was all done to pre-records. We had we've been talking about this for weeks, maybe even a month before we started shooting it, because it was big, it was complicated. On paper, when I read it, I knew that this could turn into a very huge beast, which it did, and it was a lot of fun prepping for, but we knew going in ahead that it was going to be done to pre-records. All the instruments were, painted so they wouldn't even sonically be correct, even if the players could play.
Oh, so they weren't actually even playable instruments, really, because they were.
Most of the brass probably wasn't playable. Yeah, the drum line was very playable, and those guys were tight. They had to be tight because they had to be in sync to the pre-records more than anyone else. So I went into it knowing that this is going to be a big playback, a lot of days doing playback, and how were we going to capture the dialogue that we needed to get while also blasting music for how many people were in there? 60, 70 band members. So, we went into it knowing it was going to be a pre-record. I found we had a playback operator, John DeQuino, and his crew. I think we had 60 earwigs ready to go. And that way we can play the music through the floor for the big shots. And whenever we needed to get the dialogue, we would either have the band mime to nothing, or we would actually put in the earwigs for everyone so they could play along to what they're hearing, no music through the speakers, and we can capture the dialogue for everyone else to work with.
Amazing. And then Jacob, tell us about the editorial on that sequence. I'm sure despite Dave's best efforts, it was a complicated puzzle to put that sequence together.
Well, I think in terms of Bob could speak more so to the music, in that sequence. I know we filled in with Foley. We were trying to really figure out a way. Everyone wanted to hear Milchick's footsteps as he was, strutting and leading the band, and that's been a request throughout the whole show, is to hear footsteps through really loud music. So, that means, well-recorded footsteps, and then Bob working his magic, because Bob was mixing the Foley on this show. Bob working his magic to get, to get these things to really cut through.
I just remembered, Jacob and I wouldn't watch the episodes. I would only watch the episode coming up maybe 2 weeks before we were going to mix it. I wanted to view the episode as if a viewer for the first time and get excited about it, and then talk to Jacob about notes and sound design. And Ben kept asking me, he goes, "Have you seen episode 10 yet?" And I said, "No, I haven't seen it yet." He goes, "We have a marching band." I was like, "You got a what? A marching band?" "We get a marching band in MDR." I was like, "How? What?" And then when I saw it, I was like, "Oh my God, this is going to be you."
Did you think he was pulling your leg?
Yeah, I was like, "You got a marching band? Where?" It was recorded on a scoring stage, so then I had to fit that sound into MDR. So with the right reverb and the right slap and making it a little bit smaller than it was recorded, I was able to, do some tricks, make it sound, and it sounds really big and tight for that room. But it was a brilliant way of Teddy having a theme.
The perspectivizing of hearing the band coming from way down the corridor, and then it just like Bob had a chance to really, work his magic on making, and in other episodes too with the music, like in 207 with the Billie Holiday song, that section, and you're hearing it from a huge distance away, and, and then you're hearing it very close. Same thing with the marching band. The perspective.
That was tough for us on location. There were times where we weren't just shooting an MDR. We also had cameras in various hallways with the marching band coming down. And the sets of the hallways are as confusing in real life as they are in the show. So there'd be times where I would see a camera go up and we would see a drummer and I would say, "Okay, we need a speaker in a hallway. I don't know which one it is, but we got to find out." So we got guys running cables and speakers and really trying to figure out where the shot's coming from, so everyone playing along had actual playback, because we didn't want the speakers being in the wrong hallway or the wrong room. So we were constantly chasing all these little, mouse crumbs to figure out where the cameras were at.
I've been in this business a long time. It's always surprising and fascinating to me to hear how these pieces have to be put together like a jigsaw puzzle. Guys, the show, it's streaming on Apple TV Plus and Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. It sounds just spectacular. Bob, you mentioned Dolby Atmos a little bit earlier, but I'd love to just kind of talk about that for a moment and talk about what's your approach to mixing the show in Dolby Atmos for a home theater environment. And maybe are there a few moments that kind of stand out that people with home Atmos systems should take a listen to in the show?
Definitely episode 7. Where we go, from the mono to the spread of the Atmos, the band in episode 10, the marching band in episode 10, pretty much fills the room, and even some of the elevator sounds. We've put some elevator sounds in the ceiling. You'll hear the ding coming out of the ceiling. We don't go super crazy on panning. We pick and choose our places and where to do that. If a goat, coming down the hallway, you put it in the back. We don't go crazy with it, but there are spots that you can definitely. I had a friend of mine say, all of a sudden I heard a goat in the back room, and I turned around. He thought it was behind him.
We haven't even talked about the goats. I mean, God, Jacob, tell me about Did you bring a goat into the Foley stage to do some recording?
Well, here's the amazing thing: is that aside from the scene where we have a whole flock of herd, or whatever is the proper term, of goats, that one goat, the hero goat, is actually that is the real sound of the goat. That is the performance of the goat.
That's Dave's production track?
Yeah, that is Dave's production
didn't have to
track.
loop the goat?
We did not. I fully thought going in, we're going to have to do some goat recording. It's the most amazing performance by a goat that I think I've ever seen in a movie.
The emotional stakes are very high. The goat's about to be sacrificed to,
Right.
so yeah.
No, it's it's amazing to me. I mean, Dave, you were witness to it. I don't know how they got that goat to emote exactly the right things at the right time, but the goat was amazing.
The goat even looks at the door at the right time, with everybody else. It's,
It was a method goat. It's studied under Stanislavski.
There you go. That's an old goat.
Obviously, one of the things that happens in that episode 210, the sequence of the birthing cabin where Mark's Innie and Audi are talking to each other, is a lot of that dialogue is happening through the video camera.
Lately, images from my world out here. I've been seeing yours too. It's a process called reintegration. It's a way to recouple memories so we can be one person. I started this because I see now how unfair this all is to you. And once my wife is free, I swear I will finish the process. Because this life, our life, belongs to both of us.
I'm curious about sort of what the capture was like, because again, was that a separate video unit that Dave, that you captured with, and then Jacob, can you talk about kind of processing those vocals?
Originally, normally when we do a scene where someone has to interact with someone off camera, maybe an AD or the script supervisor will be reading the off camera lines. But Adam actually wanted to play against himself, so he pre-recorded himself into an iPhone. And then we were able to get all of those snippets for him talking to himself loaded up into a computer timeline, so that whatever piece we were shooting, my sound utility at the time, Christy, she was able to play back Adam's innie to the outie or Adam's outie to the innie. So he was actually performing against himself. Every time he was by the fire, we were playing back the other stuff. And then when he went outside, so we were always just playing back through a speaker so he could just act against himself.
We were just, very mindful to make sure to preserve the geography of where we are at a given moment. Who are we with? Who are we listening to? Who is Mark with listening to? So that constant cutting back and forth between the different, the innie and the outie worlds, and we with the on and off dings of the beeps and things of the camcorder was important.
We wanted to keep the ambience was kind of helping us support his location. So anytime he was an outie, he's outside on the deck, and as an innie, he's inside next to the fire. But when he's outside on the deck and he's listening to the camcorder that was recorded next to the fire, of course I have to give him the phone futs for, the futs for the little camcorder sound, but we would also squeeze the sound of the fireplace in there. And then vice versa, when he went inside, the wind and the atmosphere would also squeeze into it. So, not only would, we would fill the room with the sound of the fireplace coming out of the little camcorder, we had the wind fighting his dialogue, so it would help support his location. And then as he gets further and further into his dialogue with his innie, I'm slowly making his voice a little bigger and bigger, a little wider and wider in the room, as if it's getting more intense, adding a little bit of height to it, a little bit of a width. So by the end, it's just, it's just him fighting with himself.
That's amazing, Bob. I've watched that scene probably 10 times. I never even noticed that. So as you get into it, you take a little bit of the futs off. So he's actually almost arguing with himself in real time.
Yeah, just a little, slightly, just to give it a little more, presence.
Anything else before I let you go, guys?
Bob and Jacob, great work, guys. I'm so happy to have seen and heard. I'm a fan of the show, and so even before I came on it, you guys were doing amazing work. And
well, we thank you for your work, David.
Absolutely. You've done great work, and yes, it helps us. Absolutely. It sounds great.
We are all hoping that we don't have to wait 3 years for season 3. We're smart enough to know that Heliar and Marquez probably only have a couple of happy moments together before things go horribly wrong. on the NBR floor, but we're going to hang in there and wait for season 3. Guys, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
On the work.
Yes, thanks.
Great. Many thanks to Bob, Dave, and Jacob for joining us on the podcast today. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Apple for helping us put this conversation together. Be sure to check out Severance in stunning Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos on Apple TV Plus. We have links, as always, in our show notes. As I mentioned up top, we have another podcast episode coming soon with cinematographer and director Jessica Lee Gagne discussing her work on the series, and that's coming soon. So if that sounds interesting to you and you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, be sure you are subscribed to us here at Dolby Creator Talks. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of the show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.